to it.
Great. Welcome to the show, Sarah. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here, Lisa.
Well, I am excited to talk with you because I think what you have covered in your book and what you have continued to build awareness about is really how to go about the process of going through a divorce and doing so with the dignity and what's best for the kids and what's best for people involved. So before we jump into the book and talking about the Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce, can you first tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So first, great to be with you today. Thanks so much. Actually to start, I never expected to write a book. I actually studied marketing and played volleyball on scholarship at Georgetown. And for over 25 years, I've worked in global marketing and leadership roles at the Coca-Cola Company, at McKinsey. And I actually recently joined Google to lead their global marketing operations. And so, I've been in the corporate world. And then in my spare time, I actually am on the board of the Jack and Jill Late Stage Cancer Foundation, which is a very special nonprofit that I have a ton of passion for in terms of helping them achieve their mission. I've been fortunate to travel the world with my job and personally, and I've been to over 55 countries in 46 of the 50 states. I have 4 more to go, which I'm
Wow.
planning to tackle a couple of those in the coming years, and then obviously more countries to see. But over the years, I've really enjoyed managing the juggling act of being a working mom while raising my daughter, Grace. And after my divorce, I wrote this book called The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. And ultimately, I really want to help to shift societal perception that a good divorce is an attainable outcome.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit though about, okay, so you were going through your own divorce, and you were inspired to write the book. Is it based on the experience of going through the divorce and it being, something that you figured out, okay, here's how we're going to make it, how to make a divorce work well? Or was it, oh, wow, this is much more difficult than I assumed it was. I need to kind of put down on paper what I've been through in the hopes that it will inspire and help other women?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So to back up, my parents actually had been married for 53 years and had this amazing partnership and still do. And so the concept of divorce was actually not something I had ever really thought, would happen to me. And so I always say, and in going into this process of writing this book, I'm actually not an advocate for divorce. I think in an ideal world, when a couple gets married, they stay happily married for the long term. And ultimately, that's not always the case. And these days, divorce is more common than ever. And so when I went through my divorce, one of the things that I tried to do is I had seen a lot of what I'd say messy divorces growing up around us. And I thought, if we're going to do this, this is not how I want to go through it. And especially with Grace, Grace didn't choose to get divorced. And I generally say to people when I'm talking about this topic, first thing is no one gets married to get divorced. The second, no one gets divorced for positive reasons. There's always something that's driven you to that decision. And the third is the children, don't get to make the decision that their parents are getting divorced, but they're the ones that are most significantly impacted by that decision. So when we went through our process, I said, you know what, I want to do this in a certain way. And so in kind of going down that path, we did approach it in a very certain way. And after my divorce, I had a number of my girlfriends that would come to me and say, hey, will you help me think through what I'm thinking through? I'm potentially considering divorce and I would like to do it the way you did it. And that's where I kind of say somehow I became a poster child for a good divorce. I don't know how that happened. So after helping each of these girlfriends through this really challenging time of life, they encouraged me to write down the guidance that I provided them. But I'll have to tell you, because I don't consider myself a writer, they would say that to me and I'd think, oh, well, yeah, that's nice, but that's not something I'm going to do. And I was on a business trip in Mexico City in 2015 or 2014, 2015. And a colleague turned to me and he said, Sarah, you're so happy. And I said, well, yeah. He said, but you're divorced. And I looked at him and I said, Salman, being divorced is not a death sentence. It just means that my ex-husband and I have decided to no longer be married to each other. And I absolutely think you could be happy. And I think your kids can be happy. And I think your ex-spouse can be happy. Like it shouldn't be that just because you got a divorce, that no one can be happy. And so I think there's just not enough conversation in this world about the topic of, how to have a good divorce.
Yeah.
So, bitter divorces is what everyone thinks about.
Yeah.
And so I really would love to figure out how we shift that perception and that expectation that just because you go through this, what is a dramatic change in life, that everything has to be negative afterwards.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is, I think, really interesting because when, I've seen, and I'm sure lots of people who are probably listening in have seen the statistic that 50% of marriages in the US end up in divorce. So the likelihood is that, that basically half of us are going to go through this, right? And we do often hear about the bitter divorces. We don't hear about the always the amicable ones. But can you talk about what are some of the ingredients required? Because I might have the best of intentions. Like I might say to myself, as a woman, as a mom, I don't want my children to have some very horrible experience because I have made a decision to no longer be with my spouse, right? I want them to not have, negative, have a horribly negative experience, but my spouse or my soon to be ex-spouse might not be on the same page. So
Right.
can you talk about what is required in order to have a good divorce?
Yeah. And why don't I first maybe define how I kind of think about the concept of good divorce,
That'd
and
be
then
great.
talk about what's required. Interestingly, my daughter actually defined what a good divorce was for me. And
really?
Yeah, which is fascinating. So she was 7 when we got divorced. This was now 12 years ago. And a year after our divorce, we're standing in line at CVS, and there's a People magazine cover on the newsstand as we're checking out, and there was a celebrity couple getting a divorce. And she looks at me and she goes, "Mommy, is that a good divorce or a bad divorce?" And I stopped and I said, "Well, Grace, what's the difference between a good divorce and a bad divorce?" She goes, "Well, a good divorce isn't when a mommy and daddy get along and are nice to each other like you and daddy. And a bad divorce is when they scream and fight and yell at each other." And I thought, wow. So I walked and I said to her, I said, "Grace, it's hard to tell from a magazine cover what type of divorce that is." But, I walked out of the CVS with her that day and I thought, wow, whatever we were doing, the fact that at age 8, Grace could say, "You have a good divorce," was really interesting, and was kind of it gave me encouragement that what we were doing as a couple in terms of co-parenting her was heading down the right direction. So I think at the end of the day, a good divorce means a couple puts aside their personal feelings for one another and really focuses on what's best for their children. That's the fundamental, concept of a good divorce. And when a couple, the hard part is when a couple goes through divorce and children involved, and you just said it, the stakes are high. We owe it to our children to assure that they're not collateral damage in this whole process. And even though a couple's decided that they no longer want to be married to each other, they made a commitment to their children to raise them in the healthiest, happiest environment possible. And I always say we cover the plugs, we put bike helmets on them, we feed them organic milk, we do all these things to make sure they're safe and happy and healthy. And then the toxicity that can come with the divorce can have a long-term impact on children's views on relationships, on their views on marriage, on just happiness, over their overall happiness in life. So I just think we have a responsibility to take co-parenting seriously with the intent of having a good divorce. And that really starts, so kind of to speak to some of the things, that starts with communication. And you need to, at the time that you decide to get divorced, you have to focus on the discussions you need to have and the decisions you need to make that have your children in focus and keeping them absolutely the priority. And then it requires a ton of patience. Because managing the day-to-day life of co-parenting and the dynamics that come with that, when you're divorced, there's a lot of patience. And, it's not, I always say it's not easy, but it is doable. And it's so worth it for the sake of your children, because this is a long journey you're on. You've had these kids that are going to be with you for the long term, and quite honestly, so is your ex-spouse. So it's how can you really co-parent together? So that's the that's kind of how I think about the good divorce. But if you think about the things that are important going into those initial steps, mindset, as I just talked, mindset's essential. And trying to go in with as much positive intent of providing the most positive experience for your children, I think allows you to go down that path, even though, again, whatever caused a divorce, you almost have to set that aside and be like, that wasn't a positive thing.
Yeah.
But don't let that then drive every decision about your children.
Yeah.
Moving forward.
Yep.
And it's a really tough, that's, I think, the fundamental piece of it.
So is it possible to go through a divorce and have a good divorce if your spouse is not necessarily as willing as you are? Because I think that you could have someone who is very willing to say, okay, I'm going to put my kids first. I'm going to focus on them and what is best for them, and what's best for them is for you not to fight with this person that is their that is their parent, their other parent. But let's say you don't have that ideal scenario, and you have just difficult circumstances that things may be involved. I mean, money, there's so many things involved. So how can you have a good divorce if some of these other things exist as you move into it?
The answer is yes, but it takes different types of effort and different types of approaches to get there. And the first thing is, if you think about that concept of keeping your children out of that toxic environment, doing whatever you can to do that. That's kind of it needs to stay front and center. So when you think about the interactions with you and your ex-spouse, and if those are going to be toxic, how do you avoid that your children are in the midst of that, even if, you might have to have those interactions? So that's one of them. But I think one of the starting things I talk about is we have to build a muscle if we don't have it yet. And I talk about that we are always told we're supposed to build our core muscles. If I do Pilates, so, you're supposed to build your core. Well, I think one of the most important muscles to have when you're going through divorce is to build a compartmentalization muscle. And what the compartmentalization muscle allows you to do is to get through the day to day. And sometimes when emotions can be high, you have to say, can I put that aside right now? Because I need to do what's best for my children. You can still have those emotions. You can still feel them. You can still express them, but choose when those emotions are allowed to really show themselves, because every time you cross those emotions with your children's interactions, either with you and your ex-spouse, or even just with your children, you're setting a tone that is almost a vicious cycle. And so, but it is so hard to do. And I know it's hard to do, but it is a muscle. And if you actually can build it over the course of time, it just becomes a bit of an easier way for you to operate over the course of time. And again, this is not overnight. So that's the first piece. The second is to always remind yourself to take the high road, even when someone is trying to take the lower road for you, or trying to put you on that lower road. Just again, this is a muscle. This is like sitting and saying, no, I'm not going to go there. I want to always say to my kids, I did all I could to keep this in the most positive and healthy light possible. Again, seem easier said than done. I have an interesting story to share. When Grace was in 6th grade, we'd already been divorced 5 years. And my ex-husband and I went to her parent-teacher conference together with Grace. Like, that was what we did in 6th grade. And her teacher, we're talking. At the end of this hour conference, the teacher stopped and she said, wait a minute, are you two divorced? And I said, oh yeah, we've been divorced for 5 years since Grace was in 1st grade. She goes, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And I said, well, it didn't occur to me to tell you. And she said, you would be surprised at how few parents in divorce situations are able to come and sit in this room together with their child and have a conversation about their child's educational experience. And she says, it makes me so sad. And I said to her, that makes me sad, because if there's one thing these two people should be able to do, regardless, again, to your point of all the things that might have triggered that divorce, to be able to come to the room and sit and talk about your kids' school and how they're doing, for an hour. It's an hour. And it's with someone else there. There's, someone that's wanting to facilitate a conversation with you. So she said, it's amazing to me that in society today, how few couples like you and your husband are approaching it this way. So that's one of those, again, it's just an example, but it goes back to your question of, even when you have an unwilling participant, what are those moments where hopefully you two can set things aside and do what's best for your children so that your children see that you're both there for them.
Yeah. Well, and I do wonder too, how important is it when you're going through going through a divorce, to have a practice of self-care in this? Because to do some of the things that you're mentioning, right? I'm thinking to myself, it is, I understand it's a muscle, as you said before. I think it's a great analogy for it, but it's hard, right? It's a hard thing to do, and to also do so with persistence and consistency.
Yes.
So, what do you have any recommendations or advice for things that women should be thinking about when they're going through this from a self-care perspective? How does self-care come into play?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think self-care is fundamental. And I think as women, we usually we put ourselves last, as we're going through things. And when things get stressful, we don't get enough sleep. We don't get out and go for that walk or get some exercise. We stop eating probably as well as we should. So I think the fundamentals and it's interesting, I always say, almost like how you thought about your pregnancy and getting ready to have a child, those same rules of thumb should almost happen as you're going through divorce. You have to remind yourself, of the fundamentals of eating well, exercising, getting your sleep. But also it's about, understanding what's helpful for you. If therapy is what's helpful, or if getting away for, a day to yourself, a couple hours to yourself, think about what you need to recharge and mentally, because there's so many mental gymnastics that are going on during a divorce, both emotionally and logistically, that sometimes it's just the space. Give yourself the space to know that you need that space to process, and you need to figure out what it is you need to be able to go through what is a very long journey. These are not quick days and months and years of this process. And so I do think it's kind of the fundamentals and the basics we need to do, and allowing ourselves the space to know that's okay, that you need that, and to prioritize yourself amongst all that you're trying to prioritize. And I realize that's easier said than done. And the only other thing I'd say that had always gave me perspective during my divorce and even after is, if you have the time to go and volunteer and help others that are in need, I will tell you, it is the best medicine to put everything in perspective.
That's great. And
I mean, just if it's a holiday, like, we can talk later about the post, but I mean, if there's a holiday where you're like, oh, I'm really down, like if you go and help others in need, all of your worries become a little bit more put in perspective of what others might be challenged with. So I've found that to help me as well.
I think that is such a great piece of advice, because I have found the same thing just personally when I just, when my father passed away, kind of relatively unexpected years ago, I remember just feeling like it's such a shock. Woe is me. I can't believe this is happening to me. This is happening to me. And it was something that really, me taking myself out of that and going and being in service to others, and finding ways to be in service to others is really the thing that ended up helping me move past that. As you deal with grief, and I actually want to talk about this concept of grief, because when I think about and talk to my girlfriends who've gone through divorce, you're grieving something, right? You're grieving the dissolution of a marriage, whatever the hopes and expectations you had that were associated with that, your own identification as a human being, because we start to identify as somebody who's married, right?
Yeah.
You are grieving certain things.
Yes.
And I would love if you could talk a little bit about that and how to move through the grief element.
So, it is a grieving process when you go through divorce, because you have, to your point, you've lost that picture that you thought that, in that journey you thought you were on is no longer that journey. It's a different,
Right.
you've done a different path, and all of a sudden it might have been a complete left turn you didn't realize you were making. So I think, first of all, giving yourself the space to know it is a grieving process, to allow yourself to feel. I talk about the year of firsts. So that first year post-divorce, when you're having first holidays and first birthdays and the first vacation with a different way. And, the traditions you may or may not have wanted to continue. So, the grieving process literally is parallel in that year of firsts. And what I generally say is, take that year and say, you know what, it's going to be a year of first. And through that year, you will learn what you want to continue in terms of traditions or ways of interacting, with, extended family and different dynamics you have to think about. And there's things you can say, you know what, I did that once, I'm never doing it again. And I can tell you my example is I did my first holiday, a Thanksgiving actually, without my daughter. She was with her dad. And it was hard. And I will tell you, and even to this day, I think holidays are hard when you're in a divorce situation and you don't have your children.
Yeah.
So I decided on the holidays I didn't have Grace, instead of spending time with my amazing extended family, my nieces and nephews, that I would go away. I'd remove myself from that situation because it was too hard. And so I think you have to be honest with yourself of what you should be expected to do in these situations, and set up either new traditions or new ways of operating that help you to both grieve and to get past it over the course of time and figure out how you can be happy. And it is a grieving process. And I also think there's this perception that people have of wearing like the scarlet letter. Like I got divorced. And I say divorce is a process that you go through. It should not define your life and your children's lives in a negative light for long term. I'm a little put off when I go to a doctor's office and it asks, the different stats, and I have to check that I'm divorced. I'm like, why does it matter?
Yeah.
I'm either single or married. Like,
right.
Tell you I'm divorced.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a little bit in the grieving process. Also, you have to set the definition of what a family looks like.
Yeah.
And how a family operates. And, and give yourself the space to understand that there's no one model these days.
Yeah.
And there's not a right model. I mean, to your point about 50% of marriages ending in divorce, there are a lot of divorced families out there. That is as normal as a family that's never gone through a divorce. So, don't beat yourself up if that's in the, the situation you land in, because it's just a matter of then reframing it and how you want to live a life moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think too, the other thing that always comes to mind for me is, I think there's, from talking with women who I know who've gone through the process of getting divorced with children involved, there's an enormous amount, as you said, this concern and this guilt, like, okay, what am I doing to my kids by doing this? What am I showing them by doing this? But I think what happens is we often forget the flip side of that, which is, what are you showing your kids about life if you stay in a relationship and you're in a relationship for many years that is not a happy one? Yeah. I'm a big believer that kids know things that we don't realize that they know. Because they are here, they're experiencing, they are seeing what's happening, whether they're conscious of it or not conscious of it. It's a subconscious thing. They are taking it all in, and they are little sponges, right? They get it all.
They see it all, Elisa. They see it all. And I totally agree with you. So I think that's the hard part, is I do think certain people say, well, it's better for us to all be under one roof. And, but I go back to that toxicity comment. But if being under one roof means that everyone's in this negative space for the long term, that is not a healthy thing.
Right.
That it is
well,
not.
What's the message? Exactly. The message is it's good to stay in an environment that is not a healthy one. That's what we're teaching them. Absolutely. By doing that. Because that it's not about what we say, right? It's about what we do.
Right. And they are observing, to your point, they are so observant. They take it all in. And, I think also when you do decide to make that change, or you think, gosh, I'm going to go down that, there's a lot that you can do as a mom to think about how that's going to impact your children. Because I think one of the things that we kind of, what kept me, and it's your point about under one roof, the concept of Grace living across two homes was like, And I had my own reality check when we had decided to go through our divorce. One of the first things we did, we went through what's called a collaborative divorce. So through that process, there's two coaches, a coach for my ex-husband and I. There's two lawyers. There's a child specialist and there's a financial neutral, and they work as a team. But we went to meet with this child specialist, and he looked at me and he said, "Sarah," he said, "do you travel?" I said, "Actually, yes, I travel internationally for my job all over the world all the time." And he looked at my ex-husband and he said, "Do you travel?" And he says, "Yeah, I travel domestically for my job." And he said, "Well, Grace is about to become a professional traveler. She's going to travel every week for the next 11 years until she goes off to college." And I burst into tears. Right? And I thought, that is not what I want for her.
Right.
And so I walked out of that session, and my ex-husband and I were talking, and I said, we have got to figure out how to minimize the feeling that she's a professional traveler every week. And so what we tried to do, and again, some of this has socioeconomic considerations, but we tried to at least make sure the basics were at both homes, and so that Grace didn't feel like she was packing a bag every week.
Yeah.
Because the concept of packing a bag and making sure you have everything every time you move from house to house. And if kids are moving, twice a week, I mean, that's just a lot of, that wasn't their choice.
Yeah.
That wasn't their choice. So that piece was really stuck with me. And, I used to say we'd have balancing days where I'd say, does she have enough socks in each house? Does she have enough? You had it, but that was my job and my ex-husband's job. It's not up to Grace to figure out, did she have enough socks at each house?
Yeah.
Again, that comes down to those logistics of life. But it is a tough thing to wrap your head around when you're thinking about, to your point, do you stay under one roof and be unhappy and everyone's unhappy? Or do you go under two roofs and then there's just more logistics you have to manage, but potentially everyone can be happy?
What do you hope that people gain from reading your book?
Oh gosh, I think, what I hope people gain most is a belief. A belief that a good divorce is possible, and to understand what it takes to go down this path. It does take a lot of focused effort to achieve a good divorce, but it is attainable. It truly is attainable. As I said earlier, it's not easy, but it's doable, and it's so worth it for the sake of your children. Yeah. And my book itself is written in very much bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
So, it has kind of preparing for the change, during the change, and post the change. And, when I was going through divorce, I was given a lot of books that were very dense, and I would open them and I'd close them. I never read any of them.
Yeah.
I never touched them because there was too much. And so when I decided to write this book, I thought, I'm going to write it because women who are going through divorce, again, have so much coming at you. It's hard to focus. So it's meant to be where you could open it and read just one page. There's only one topic per page. There's 185 topics in the book, but you might just want to read one topic and then just, reflect on that and spend some time on that. And in the paperback version, I actually left a lot of white space. And it's funny, the editor, when I was working with them, they said, "You're wasting so much paper." And I said, you know what? The white space is for them to think and reflect. They don't need the next topic right there. They just need to know that, let's look at that topic. So I feel like the book is really meant to be a guide that you can, open when you need to, refer to when you need to, but I hope that it does build a belief that a good divorce is possible.
Yeah. So if people want to continue to follow you and what you write about, what is the best way for them to do that, Sarah?
Well, thanks for asking. So first, I have a website, gooddivorce.guide. So that has all the information on the book and where to contact me and all my social media links and all those good things. The other thing, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. But I think, the thing that I want everyone to know, that I so believe that this is a attainable thing. And if the book can help them in any way, that's why I wrote it. I actually had a woman stop me in the grocery store right after I wrote the book. And she said to me, "Are you Sarah Armstrong, the author?" And I stopped, and it was early. I said, "Oh, actually I am." And she said she'd gone to my book signing at Barnes & Noble, and she said, I'm going through divorce, and I carry your book with me, and it keeps me calm.
Wow. Well, what a gift.
Yeah. And she thanked me for writing the book. And I stood there in the produce section of the grocery store after she walked away and said, that is why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
To help a
Yeah.
woman who I don't know, who needs some advice. And if I can help keep her calm in this really tumultuous time in life, then that actually is the gift I'm trying to give to as many women as possible.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you for spending your time with us. We really appreciate the insights, and hopefully we'll have lots of women get an opportunity to get value from your book, as so many others have before them.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed talking to you. And I appreciate you providing an opportunity to talk more about this topic, because I do think the concept of a good divorce is something that should be achievable.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. Thanks so much.